The Banda Islands, also often shortened to Banda, is a small group of volcanic islands in the Banda Sea in the eastern part of nowadays Indonesia. And you might wonder why I'm talking about the Banda Islands here when my channel is about the Netherlands. But it's about Dutch culture, traditions, places to visit, and more, and also about history. The genocide of the Banda Islands is an important but dark part of Dutch history and it deserves to be talked about. So here we go. The Banda Islands, also often shortened to Banda, is a small group of volcanic islands in the Banda Sea in the eastern part of nowadays Indonesia. It is part of the Moluccas or Molucca Islands and found in the Maluku province. The Moluccas is a whole other video on its own. The Banda Islands have a population of approximately 15,000 people, and the islands are found roughly 2,000 kilometers east of the island of Java. The Netherlands colonized Indonesia for 350 years. This was not the entire Indonesia that we know today. There was a long time when the Dutch only had a limited reach. But in the beginning of the 20th century, the influence of the colonization was felt in every part of nowadays Indonesia. 20,000 Dutch people ruled over 40 million people. But how? Here's a hint, it was not by being nice. It all started at the Moluccas. Arab, Spanish, Portuguese traders and so on got cloves and nutmeg from the islands. These spices were popular but rare, making them very expensive. So the Dutch traders wanted to buy them themselves. The first expedition from the 7 United Netherlands were set to the Banda Islands, as well as some other areas, on the 1st of May 1598 and arrived in 1599. This was done by the so-called Volkompagnie, which was a trade combination from the United Provinces that were trading in Asia between 1594 and 1602. This was before the Dutch East India Company was founded. The company was founded in 1602. The VOC was founded because the company forced companies to unite in the VOC. And the reason? The cutthroat competition. So the Dutch government only gave the company VOC the exclusive right to trade in Asia, and if anyone wanted to be successful in making money, they simply had to participate. The trade combination, or the Volkompagnie, so before the VOC or Dutch East India Company, was financed by wealthy merchants from the northern Netherlands and wealthy immigrants from the southern Netherlands. A fleet under the command of Jacob Cornelis van Neck, Jacob van Heemskerk and Wiebrand van Warwijk made the first contact with native Balinese on the Banda Islands in 1599. Van Heemskerk signed several contracts with the village chief and built a spice trading post. The Banda Islands are essentially the original home of nutmeg and maize. Maize is the dried seed coat of the nutmeg, meaning it didn't grow anywhere else, making it very valuable. Before the Dutch arrived at the Banda Islands, the Portuguese, English, Arabs, Spanish, Chinese and Indians also came to the Moluccas to get spices. The Portuguese and Spaniards did not have a great relationship with the natives of the island Ternate, so the Dutch offered to be an ally to the Sultan against the Spanish and the Portuguese. The Dutch would take care of the Spanish and Portuguese, and in return they could trade the spices. It is important to remember that nowadays Indonesia didn't exist at that time. Nowadays Indonesia was covered in small and larger kingdoms and such, with many conflicts between all of them. And when the Dutch East India Company was making its rounds around the many islands and kingdoms, it conveniently jumped between many conflicts as local monarchs often asked ships of the company for help. In return, the Dutch created a contract which stated that the ruler could only deliver his spices after victory to the Dutch. And if they didn't do it, there would be war. The Dutch East India Company wanted to make as much money as possible. And how do you do that? By creating a monopoly on certain expensive spices. The company went to the Banda Islands and also arranged a deal here that only they could sell the nutmeg and maize, but the native Balinese weren't too keen on that and also sold spices to others. So from 1609 to 1621, the Dutch East India Company was fighting to conquer the Banda Islands. And how did they do that? By fighting famines, murdering and deportations. The last part of conquering the Banda Islands was the genocide of Banda in 1621 by a certain Jan Pieterszoon Coen and his men. It was so brutal that even the company was shocked, told him to come back home and to tone it down, which said something at the time, but police don't think the company wasn't happy with him because they still rewarded him after he came home. Well, the first Dutch people arrived on the Banda Islands in 1599 and some people were definitely murdered here and there. The genocide started in 1621, simply because they couldn't get the monopoly on nutmeg like they wanted. One of the reasons why the Dutch couldn't get that is because English people had settled on a few other islands called Ai and Roen. Because of their presence, the Bandanese also could sell their spices to them. And the Bandanese also sold them to the Portuguese, who had been trying to control the nutmeg trade since 1512. In the years that followed, there were negotiations, shows of force, and sometimes armed conflicts emerged between the Dutch and the Bandanese. The Bandanese were supported by the English and the important trading city Makassar. There were a few things that led to the genocide of the Banda Islands in 1621. One of the reasons is the murder that happened years before that of a Dutch admiral named Pieterszoon Coen. He and his fleet had the order to create a monopoly on nutmeg. He had a letter from Stadholder Maurits van Oranje, which was taken to the natives of the Banda Islands, where they asked them for permission to build a fort on the island. But obviously no answer arrived. So in 1609, after a while, the admiral simply started building the fort. That's when the people of Banda made clear they wanted a compensation and to meet with the admiral, which is where he was murdered, which is why many of the Dutch men were out for revenge. But the main reason was ordered by the VOC company, because of the fact that the people of Banda didn't fulfill their part of not selling spices to other countries as they sold to the English too, because they simply wanted to. And when you're a 17th century company that wants a monopoly on some of the world's rarest spices, you will not like that attitude. After Admiral Pieterszoon Coen was killed during so-called negotiations in 1609, the frustrations were running high. And one of the men that was part of his entourage was at the time a young merchant by the name of Jan Pieterszoon Coen. Some VOC directors who were confident that only the complete subjugation of the Banda Islands, including the removal of the native Bandanese, would be the only solution. And that thought was changed into reality in 1621. By that time, Jan Pieterszoon Coen had grown out to become the Governor-General of the VOC, and he sailed with a large fleet to the Banda Islands to destroy the Bandanese resistance and to chase the English away from the area. J.P. Coen, at that time Governor-General, which was the highest position in the company in the East Indies, travelled with a large fleet to the Banda Islands on a punitive expedition to make them stay true to the contract, if necessary, by force. And so they murdered almost the entire islands. They had around 1,000 VOC soldiers and 80 Japanese mercenaries. And these Japanese mercenaries weren't just random soldiers, no. They were highly trained and skilled samurai executioners that were employed by the Dutch East India Company, which ordered the beheadings of dozens of village heads. It is said that only between 600 to 1,000 of the 15,000 people survived. The rest were either killed, fled, or sent to slavery in Batavia. All of that to make sure the monopoly of nutmeg and maize was safe. It gave Jan Pieterszoon Coen or J.P. Coen the nickname Butcher of Banda or Slachter van Banda. After the English were driven out of the area, they continued to claim the island of Roen for almost 50 years. They gave up that claim, as well as the one in Suriname, at the Peace Treaty of Breda in 1667. This in sort of exchange for New Amsterdam or New York, which they had conquered. J.P. Coen was asked to return to the Netherlands after the excessive violence and asked to tone it down, yet they rewarded him for successfully conquering the nutmeg and maize monopoly, and he is offered a second term of Governor-General. So I guess I didn't mind the violence after all. So what happened after the genocide on the Banda Islands? In 1621, the production process of the nutmeg and maize had to be organized in a different way. The nutmeg gardens of the Bandanese were annexed by the VOC, then they were parceled out and the VOC leased the nutmeg plantations to ex-VOC employees and their descendants. These perconies, as they were called, had to sell the nutmeg and maize with a fixed price to the VOC, who then made a killing, as nutmeg was one of the most important and expensive spices in the 17th century. Jan Pieterszoon Coen sent slaves to the almost empty islands due to the genocide. And the slaves had to take care of the nutmeg trees, and the land was divided on the Dutch people who supervised the plantations. They arrived from the Aru Islands, New Guinea, and sometimes even from India, thousands at once. This turned the Banda Islands into the first plantation and slave society in Dutch-controlled territory. Slavery in the territories of the Netherlands was only abolished in 1860, but the Pekingese stelsel only in 1873. The Banda Islands are roughly 2,500 kilometers from at that time Batavia, nowadays Jakarta, making it a few months sailing to get from one Dutch territory to the next. So we now know how the genocide of the Banda Islands happened and why. Who was the person who ordered it to happen and what do we know about him? Jan Coen soon became one of the most known employees of the Dutch East India Company. He ended up becoming the Governor-General of Oost-India, or the East Indies, and is seen as the main person that created the Dutch rule over this part of Indonesia. He also founded the Batavia Trading Post in 1619, which was created by burning down the previous city of Jakarta, chasing out the natives and then creating a new town called Batavia. Batavia then became the center of trade of the Dutch East India Company in Asia. So we know he was not the most pleasant man, which is an understatement of the century, but of course we're also looking at this man through the eyes of the 21st century, where people are still brutal, but perhaps a little less than during the 16th and 17th century. Jan Pieterszoon Coen was born in 1587 in the historic city of Horen in the West-Friesland region, nowadays part of the province of North Holland. He was the son of Pieter Jan Zoon, who had moved from the village of Twisk to Horen, as the city was flourishing economically during that time. Jan Pieterszoon Coen was baptized on the 8th of January 1587 in the Grote Kerk or main church in Horen. When he was 13, Jan was sent to Rome in Italy to study commerce, bookkeeping and languages. He ended up staying there for 6 years, and that is when he returned to the city of Horen. And once he was in Horen, he found a job as a junior merchant or under merchant at a VOC ship called the Horen. In December 1607, this ship set sail with a fleet of 13 ships to the Indies. It traveled to the Banda Islands, as later murdered. Admiral Pieter Willemszoon Verhoef got the assignment to obtain a monopoly on nutmeg. Jan Pieterszoon Coen returned to Horen in 1611, but a year later he left to the Indies once again. This time, Coen had been promoted and was a senior merchant and left with the ships the Provincia and the Hope with the destination Bantam. This was an important trading center in the west of Java, where the Dutch already had a trading post, which was in pretty bad shape according to Coen. Jan reorganized it and was promoted once again as the Accountant General and Governor of the trading offices in Bantam and Jakarta, turned Batavia in 1619, on October 1613. Then in 1617 he became a Governor General of the VOC, which was the highest position of the company in the East Indies. And in 1618 he assigned the building of a fort near Jakarta as a way to decrease the power of the English and the regent of Bantam in the region. And shortly after the creation of the fort, Coen ordered the attack on the English. In the beginning it looked like the battle would be won by Coen and his men, but the English got back up. That's when Jan Coen went to the Moluccas, as the Netherlands already had a stable base camp there. And in May 1619 he returned with an army of 1,000 men and beat the English, who had some disagreements with the local power, making them all weaker. And he then wanted to create a city at the location of Jakarta. First he thought to name it New Horen, after the city he was from, but the VOC chose to name it Batavia to honor what they thought at the time were their ancestors called the Batavs. This is not correct, but they didn't know that at the time. Coen made Batavia a powerful trading center, but his ambitions didn't stop in modern-day Indonesia. He also tried to conquer China, which failed, and in February 1623 he stopped as a Governor-General and Pieter de Carpentier became the new one. Once Coen was back in the Netherlands, he was very much rewarded for what he did in the Banda Islands and Batavia by the stadholder Maurits van Oranje and the States General. Jan Pieterszoon Coen developed new plans for another reorganization in the VOC and was once again asked to become a Governor-General on the 3rd of October 1624. And in March 1627, Jan Coen travelled with the ship Galjas van Horen again to the East Indies, where he was reinstated as a Governor-General on the 30th of September. Because of the return of Jan Pieterszoon Coen, the English decided to leave the area of Batavia for good and they created their main base in Bantam. The Javan Emperor Mataram II asked Coen after this happened for help to conquer Bantam from the English. Jan Pieterszoon Coen refused, which is why the Javan sovereign then attacked Batavia twice, but both attacks were fought off. However, Jan Pieterszoon Coen did die during the second attack, but not because of any fire or by being shot. He presumably died of cholera. He was 42 years old and buried in the City Hall of Batavia on the 22nd of September 1629 as the church was destroyed during the attacks.